Hi, Neerothambi Pillay here from Investment Rise, and we in New South Wales, we now have a new Premier. And one of her first priorities that she's committed to is to make housing more affordable, especially in Sydney. Well, I for one would like to wish her all the best, because I think she has a virtually, and I do say virtually, impossible task ahead. Let me explain why. You see, I'm sure you know that prices are determined ultimately by supply and demand. Okay, so when there is an undersupply or an excess demand versus supply, prices rise. And when there's an oversupply or less demand, prices either flatline or go down. See, from about 2009 onwards, the Sydney market, there was an undersupply of housing, so it was excess demand. And then in about mid-2012, China started investing into Sydney in big numbers, and our prices just shot up. The undersupply was always there, the demand then took off, and you know what prices have done. But then in about second half of 2016 or so, that all started to flatline a bit. We'd had massive growth in prices. All of a sudden the government started changing regulations, foreign lending regulations changed, the Chinese government changed their regulations on taking money out, and price growth started to slow down. Especially in the more affordable markets, like for example, out west, if you've read the statistics, we've seen prices drop 3% in the last 6 months to the end of December 2016. Now, that's not a crash by any stretch of the imagination, but it shows that the growth has started to be curtailed. It started to slow down. But the problem is many of these markets are already in oversupply, especially out west. So if you read the latest statistics again, Parramatta and west and inner west and even southwest are areas of massive oversupply. So the price growth isn't going to be there, and prices are starting to come back a bit. But does that make them more affordable? I mean, if you're looking to buy something at $750,000 and prices come back, let's say they come back 50 grand, which I don't think is going to happen, but let's just say that happens. It's now $700,000. Is that really affordable? No. It just means that if you're an investor investing in these areas, you're not going to make much money for quite some time. In fact, you're going to lose money in the short term. But for all of us looking at getting this issue of affordable housing addressed, it doesn't really address it. So what's the government going to do? Well, let's have a look at it. Their first option is look at taxes. They could look to maybe increase the capital gains tax that people pay, or investors pay rather, when they sell a property. Well, that's not going to help, because all that's going to do is going to deter investors from selling or slow down when they're going to sell, which means there'll be less properties available on the market, which will reduce supply, which therefore means that prices are not going to fall. In fact, the number of listings in Sydney is down 25% from this time last year. So we've already got less properties available on the market. Forget the apartments for now, but we're talking, let's say, in the housing market. And if you go and play with capital gains tax, you're only going to make that issue even worse. So that option, even though it's been talked about much in the press, gone. Forget about it. Number two, they could increase the land tax, which is the holding costs that you pay when you own a house. The problem with that is not going to affect the entry price. The price of the house is still the price of the house. It's just going to make it more difficult for an investor to hold on to the property. But you know what they're going to do? They'll just pass on at least a proportion of that increase in land tax to their tenants. So rents will rise. Well, that's not going to help anything either. So those two taxes, pretty pointless. Of course, then you've got the issue of negative gearing. Right? People are going, take it away, it's going to make prices drop. Really? Is Sydney the only major city in the world that's got housing that's unaffordable for most? No. New York, London, but they don't have negative gearing. So taking it away, even if it does allow some people to afford houses more easily because prices come down a little bit, all it's going to do is, with the excess demand that we still have, because there's so many people who can't afford housing who's going to grab onto any sort of price reduction, it's going to drive prices back up again. And now we're back in the same boat. So that's not going to help. So what about then if we come back to basic economics, supply and demand, as I said at the start? What if the government looks at, well, what if we can reduce demand? How do you reduce demand for housing in Sydney when we've got so much immigration coming in? We've got a natural population growth. Well, they could take the jobs away. Literally, if they take all the jobs and put it in Broken Hill or wherever else, that'll do it. But I don't think that's what we want. Because we still want the jobs that we have here in Sydney. So that's not going to help. What if, for example, the government said, okay, let's look at the demand. Let's help people get into property. Let's give them a grant. Well, all that's going to do is increase demand. That's going to increase prices once more. What if they reduce stamp duty? Well, they reduce stamp duty. All of a sudden, if people have extra money to spend, the demand increases again. They jump back into the market. Prices rise again. So the problem is, if the government starts to play with taxes, or the government starts to play with any kind of demand-based initiative, i.e. making it easier to get into property or giving you some sort of grant, number one, all that's only going to be is temporary, because eventually the government can't keep giving you grants. They run out of money, so that'll stop. And then you've got a bigger problem because they've driven prices up. Okay? And the taxes issue doesn't help either. So if we can't work with taxes, we can't work on demand, what about supply? Because basics supply and demand. If you increase supply over demand, then prices should at least, very least, stop growing and generally go backwards a bit. So what if they start looking at more affordable housing? They could increase the supply. But how do you increase supply of houses when you've got no land? You've got to go where there's land. But the land is all available, is all sort of west and southwest. And even if that happens and they can make houses out there more affordable, the houses, in many of these areas are still tapping $1 million plus. If they make them more affordable, well, it's going to have other issues, because then you've got a population that's living miles away from Parramatta at least, and certainly the city. You've got all sorts of other infrastructure with roads and whatnot. So people aren't going to want to live out there because there's no jobs out there. And I know this may not sound great, so what's the way I believe that we can address this issue? Because I do believe that this issue can be addressed in Sydney without affecting existing homeowners who've had to work hard, who've got some equity in their houses. It's not a short-term solution though. It's a long-term solution, which is we've got to invest in infrastructure. We've got to move the jobs sort of away from the CBD and the Parramatta. We've got to start having jobs in different areas. Invest in high-end infrastructure, such as a bullet train from Sydney to Brisbane. Imagine if you can get to somewhere like Coffs Harbour in 40 minutes. All of a sudden, now Coffs Harbour is a place you can live, and you can get to Sydney within 40 minutes for work. Sounds ridiculous, right? But it is possible. But these are not short-term solutions. See, the Premier has to make a choice if she's serious about addressing the issue of affordable housing. She's either got to say, we're going to make it affordable for the current generation of people who can't afford it, which means she's going to do something with taxes, grants, or something of that nature. But then we're going to do that at the expense of the next generation who won't be able to afford the houses. I don't know about you, that doesn't sound great. Or the other option is say, look, we need to address the Sydney problem on the long-term perspective, which is that the way the city is built, how it's evolved, isn't conducive to making house prices affordable. We need to start investing in long-term infrastructure. Like I said, fast trains. We need to start moving the jobs away from the CBD and from Parramatta, out of Sydney, so people can go, look, I can live further west of Campbelltown if I want to, for example, but I can still get to work in 20 minutes because there's a job hub over there. That's what she needs to do, but that is not an easy decision. That's a long-term play. But either way, whichever decision she makes, as an investor, if you're looking to get into the Sydney market, remember the state government, and probably the federal government as well, is trying to make Sydney prices more affordable. Translation, make them cheaper, bring the prices down. When they are saying that they're committed to doing that, why would you as an investor want to be entering that particular market? We've already got oversupply in the apartment market in many areas of Sydney, especially those affordable price points for, well, so-called affordable price points in Sydney, which we're talking $750 and under. Now the government is trying to make prices cheaper again. As an investor, should you really be looking to buy into this market in 2017? Let me know what you think in the comments field below. Would you buy in Sydney today? or would you look elsewhere? This has been Nero Thambi Pillay. I look forward to speaking to you soon. Bye for now.